can do it. All right, guys. We're a little bit behind. Had some technical difficulties. It is a little, maybe. All right, we had a little bit of issue with the camera, but we got it fixed. Let's see. This Sunday is the shop. It'll be 4:30 at our place. Does this sound a little hot? It's got that echoey. The men's group, the shop, 4:30, our house on Sunday, and what else? I know there's something else. Thursday, next Thursday, is Reformation Day at the Gaylors. Are the Gaylors here tonight? That's going to be at, well, my phone says 5:30, so I'll assume that's right. Because I think my wife put that in there, so 5:30 next Thursday, Reformation Day at the Gaylors. And that's about all for now. So that's all stuff next week. I don't think we really have anything else going on the rest of this week. Okay, let's get started.
All right, good evening. Let's stand and worship the Lord together. Our first hymn is going to be 12 out of the Grace Chapel Songbook. Take his easy yoke and wear it. Love will make obedience sweet. Christ will give you strength to bear it, while his wisdom guides your feet. Save to glory where his ransom captives meet. Blessed are the eyes that see him, blessed the ears that hear his voice. Blessed are the souls that trust him, and in him alone rejoice. His commandments then become their happy shores. Sweet as home to pilgrims weary, to newly opened eyes, or for springs in deserts dreary, is the rest across supplies. All who takes it shall to rest immortal rise. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below. Praise him above the heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen.
Well, we are on part 4 of this series on science and the Bible and God, a little bit of philosophy, I guess you could say. We've done some philosophy, reason, and just reasoning in general about origins and creation and that sort of thing. I'm still kind of trying to work out the length of these lessons because when we teach like this on Wednesday nights, I tend to go, I ad lib a lot more, and it beefs it up really long, and then sometimes it's too long, so I apologize about that. This one should be a little bit shorter. I tried to keep the word count down, which is good because we took forever to get started tonight anyway. So this one I wanted to draw from, it's actually 2 interviews with 6 guys total, but only 5 different, there's one guy that's in 2 interviews. Wes sent out a link to one of them, I believe. It was, there's a program called Uncommon Knowledge by Peter Robinson from the Hoover Institute. He interviews Thomas Sowell like all the time, every time he has a book, so you know he's really good. Big fan of anything by Thomas Sowell is worth reading. But he has done a couple sets of interviews on stuff like mathematical challenges to Darwin's theory of evolution, and he interviews in that Stephen Meyer, David Berlinski, and David, it's another guy with a funny name. It's 2 Jewish guys, Berlinski and David Galintner. I'm not as familiar with him, but those 2 guys they're not Christians. They're not even necessarily, they don't even necessarily believe in intelligent design. Meyer does believe in intelligent design. He's an old earth guy, but he's at least a believer. And Robinson interviews those guys once, and then he does a second interview, this time with Meyer, John Lennox, and Michael Behe. I believe it's Behe. Those 3 guys, I believe, are all believers and really good scientists, and that one is also really good. I think that one is called like Evidence of a Creator, but the data in those interviews, I wanted to get into this series because I couldn't find that link that Wes sent. I had listened to it a few times before in the past anyway, and none of the women got the link, and I couldn't find it, so I figured it'd be worth at least distilling some of what is said in those two interviews, because it really does bulk up a lot of what we've talked about already. They do talk about some of what we have covered already, but this, especially, they bring out the mathematical, basically, impossibilities of Darwinism and the theories involved with that. So that's why I'm drawing from those. And then I was going to do some Jason Lise or Lyle. I don't know which way it's pronounced. I think it's Lise. But his book is really good, but it was too conceptually similar to what we've already talked about, so I kind of abandoned that. But if you come across any of his material, it is really good. I know I mentioned him before. So these guys, at least in this first interview with Meyer, Berlinski, and I'm always going to forget this guy's name, or how to say it, Gelentner. It doesn't look like that, but that's how it's said, I believe. Actually, you may have heard of Gelentner because he is one of the, he's in computer science and stuff like that. The Unabomber actually mailed him a bomb and almost killed him. And I think he lost his right eye, so I'm sympathetic to him. And I think he lost like 4 fingers on his right hand, which I didn't know. I saw him in the interview and he had a glove over his hand and I was like, now that's weird. But then I found out after the fact that he was almost killed by the Unabomber. So he's probably more well-known than I realized, but I had not heard of him much. I know I'd heard him interviewed, I just didn't know the name. So anyway, these guys aren't united in their faith or in their worldview, but all of them have very reliably and systematically dismantled Darwin's theory of evolution. So, they're not Christians per se, Meyer is, but even Meyer's not a young earther. So it's not a bunch of young earthers. These are actual scientists, and I think Gelentner's at Yale. Berlinski is probably retired at this point, but he's a highly educated dude as well. I think he's at the Discovery Institute part-time at least. They're not like a bunch of young earth creationists making these arguments. They're dismantling it purely scientifically. And they're things that we agree with and things that we have said for a long time. So we do have agreement with them on this. And we have a small amount of agreement with certain elements of Darwinism. Obviously not the whole concept, not the big idea of it. But we do agree on the fact that natural selection can account for a degree of fine-tuning within species in certain environments, right? Like slight changes in beak size or wingspan or maybe fur density in an animal, stuff like that. So natural selection contributes. It really does kill off things that don't help certain animals survive. That sort of trait, they can die off more. But we strongly disagree, and it's an often denied scientific fact that Darwinism can account for the emergence of new kinds of animals, new animal kinds. Obviously, that's the whole idea of it. It's, all life came from a single cell organism and evolved. That's the idea of Darwinism. We deny that strongly. And scientifically, it's impossible that happened, especially the way that he says that it happened or the way that he proposed that it would happen. It is a scientific impossibility, not like obviously it's a biblical impossibility. It's a silly idea. It's incredibly silly. Evolution, we've talked about information theory. Evolution cannot add information to genes. Random mutation cannot account for evolutionary progression from simple to incredible complexity. Not just like the idea of simple to complex, but wildly complex compared to what they say we started at. Evolution cannot account to that. And to be fair, Darwin was using 19th century data when he made these propositions, and his model doesn't fit 21st century data. And honestly, I 100% believe that if he saw the data that we get to see, he would discard his entire theory anyway. In fact, the things that he proposed or said, the doubts that he expressed about it said, well, if you find this or this, and he said certain things, both of them we have found, and that should dismantle his entire theory. So I think he would reject his own theory if he got to see what we got to see. He didn't get to see 21st century data. His model doesn't fit 21st century data, which is one of the many reasons that it's so silly that it's continually held on to so vociferously in academia. Now, I know why they do it. It's silly that they do it. I know why they do it. It's because they have no other alternative. So they have to. If they could think of something better, they would, and they would abandon it because it's laughably silly. But they have nothing better, and with all the other scientific presuppositions that they have and discoveries, this is all they're ever going to come up with. So they have to pretend that it's real. Now, Darwin suggested a gradual, step-by-step evolution. You know, he says it came by very slight modification, slowly over time. And those modifications came from gene mutations. The fossil record, which he didn't have hardly any access to. They began to get fossils and stuff, but compared to what we have now, not at all. The fossil record flat out contradicts this. There is not gradual evolution from one kind to another, which is what he expected to find. One of the things he said, you know, if you don't find this in the fossils, then, you know, I'm wrong. And we don't find it in the fossils. Now, they can always say, well, you'll find it eventually. It's like, well, no, because of what we have found dismantles the idea of it being gradual from one to another. We'll get there, but so the fossil record contradicts that theory. Not only are unchanged animals found in the fossil record that have not evolved over what they claim is millions of years, but the animals show up fully formed all of a sudden. They're like all just there immediately. That's because of how they were buried in the flood, but they think, you know, these are gradual bearings, and they look at it as like a timeline, and it just doesn't happen the way that they think that it's supposed to happen. They interpret the fossil record wrong. They think it's like you're going back in time as you see it, but you look at it and you find a layer and like, boom, they're all there. These fully developed animals of their different kinds, and there's no transition into those. So there's no transition intermediary forms that show gradual evolution. It does not exist, and it's never going to exist. They're never going to find it. It's not there. Even if they're millions of years scheme. Right? Even if we take their scheme, that it's millions of years, if that's accepted, which we don't, but the animal forms still show up suddenly without near enough time to evolve as Darwinism proposes. And it's not even close. It's not like a maybe. It's not like, oh, I could see how creationists might think. No, it's not even close. It doesn't work at all. And that's true geologically, and biologically, both. Where you look at the data and it's not even close. It's laughably silly. The way that it's described when they look at the fossils is it's an explosion of life. You've probably heard of the Cambrian explosion, things like that. It's just an explosion of information. If it's an explosion of life and the diversity of life, that also means an explosion of information, because to get that life, you need the information to produce that life. We've covered all that last time when we did information theory. And those life forms show up in the fossil record, and they're largely in the forms that we see now. They're of the kinds that we see now. Remember, Darwin not only did not have the fossil information, but he was completely ignorant of the incredible complexity of the cell. Darwin did not get to see inside of a cell. DNA, didn't know about it, didn't even understand it, because they didn't have the data to even begin that sort of study. And even today, we don't have fully grasped the cell and DNA. Like, you know, we keep getting deeper and deeper. Like, you know, with telescopes, we keep seeing farther and farther into outer space. And same with microscopes, we keep seeing smaller and smaller and smaller. And, you know, this is the smallest thing. And then you break it open, it's full of stuff. And you're like, oh, my word, look at all this stuff. And then you break those open, and it's full of more stuff. You're like, oh, my goodness, look at all this stuff. And you have to, like, you know, there's levels, and you keep getting tinier and tinier and tinier, and it's more and more and more and more complex. And same with outer space. But he didn't, you know, we're not even there yet. We're not at the end of it. We haven't found the tiniest thing that is. Darwin didn't know about molecules. He didn't, you know, obviously he doesn't know about molecular machines that run the cells, because he couldn't see inside the cells, and he didn't understand molecules, so he couldn't understand the molecular machines that run the cells. He had no concept of any of that. The cell, to them, at that time, it just looked like a little piece of jelly. And that's kind of how they described it. And, you know, in the microscopes of their day, that's all they really had. They could see there's something there, there's cells, but they didn't know what's beyond that. So it looks like jelly. And some of the scientists, they were just, well, yeah, it just kind of bubbles up from the sea. They didn't really know where it came from or what it was. Cells are incredibly complex. They're like little cities, right? They have electrical apparatuses and they have vehicles within them. They have information embedded within them. They're run by all these molecular machines that are incredibly complex, that have just blatant engineering. Like, you know how you look at a car and you're like, someone engineered this car to do a thing? You can look at the molecular machines in a cell and it's blatant engineering. Like, someone designed this machine to do a thing, and it does the thing in the cell, makes it run. Behe, who coined the term irreducible complexity, you've probably heard that. He uses the idea of evolution of like a mousetrap. But think about just a simple mousetrap. You know, you have a spring and you hold it and, you know, a rat springs it and it comes down and kills it. The evolution of a simple mousetrap, right? It's got these different pieces to it. And you need all those pieces, but it can't evolve slowly. That kind of thing, a machine like that cannot evolve slowly. Each of the pieces need each other to function. The functionality of each piece is dependent on the functionality of the other pieces. You can't just like throw out the pieces and be like, there's a mousetrap, right? You take one piece away and it's useless. If you don't have the spring in the mousetrap, is it going to do anything? No. It's not going to kill anything. If you don't have the pad that triggers the spring, if you don't have the whole thing that holds down the spring, if you don't have a pad which, you know, holds the whole thing together in one unit, you need all the pieces. As simple as that is, you need all the pieces there, otherwise it's useless. And if you take away one piece of it, it doesn't work. So it needs the other parts, and it needs them at the same time, and it needs them in a particular relationship to each other, right? You can't just take the pieces, you know, lay them out and be like, that's a mousetrap, and it's disassembled. Like, no, those pieces have to relate to one another in a very specific way for it to do a thing, to be useful in any way. It's got to be assembled. They got to relate to each other in a specific way. So if a mousetrap were evolving, then each of those things individually would have to arise individually by random mutation. And they would have to do so simultaneously, and they would have to do so in a specific relationship with each other. Like, the evolution of a spring would be unbelievable, but the evolution of a spring that can be held down with this other thing that evolves at the same time, that gets triggered by another thing that sets it off, and it all held together by another thing, each one individually arising via mutation in a way that they all go together, you see how that starts to get pretty ridiculous, right? There's no way that could ever happen. A gradual step-by-step approach, as proposed by Darwin, does not work because the intermediary forms provide no functional advantage. If there's anything on the way to that, the intermediary form isn't a good thing without the rest of it that makes it good and useful, right? So an intermediary form doesn't have a functional advantage by itself as it's evolving. Therefore, natural selection can't detect the usefulness of that intermediary thing to keep it around, to give it an advantage, to like make that propagate more, right? So bottom line, things are exponentially more complicated than Darwin ever knew. He had no idea how complex things were. And he even admitted this himself. He said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. That's why I said, if he saw what we saw, he'd be like, oh, that was a silly idea. But I was doing what I could with what I had. I mean, the entire cell is literally full of irreducibly complex machines. He says organs there. I don't think he means like specifically body organs. I mean, it's, you know, organisms, units, things like that. Almost everything is irreducibly complex and does not work in his system. They can't evolve conceptually, and they can't evolve mathematically according to their timeline. They can't do it mathematically. The parts of these machines are made of proteins. You need amino acids to form proteins, but even once you have the protein has to fold in a very specific way to do something useful. And that protein development, to even get to the proteins, needs code, that's information. And all of that kind of thing can be mathematically calculated. Since the 1960s, we have known of what some have called the mathematical problems of Darwinism. It's really It should be called the mathematical impossibility of Darwinism. It is. It's impossible. The reason is that mutations, which is like his driving mechanism for information, they're rare. They're actually really rare. They're exceedingly scarce. And functioning proteins, which he needs to get via mutations, and he needs them in incredible abundance to develop life. They are likewise so rare that the numbers that we're talking here, just conceptually, we don't even know. They're astronomically small. So, like the combination that a protein could be made, and the likelihood if you develop a protein at random, the likelihood of it being a useful protein is 1 in the 10 to the 77th power. So a 10 with 77 zeros. Like, we don't have names for numbers this big. 1 in the 10 to the 77th to get a protein that is useful. And what you need to do with that protein is incredibly complex after that. That's just to get the protein. And that's why they keep throwing immense amounts of time into their scheme. Just chucking in millions of years, billions of years, because they think if we can just get people to think, it's rare, but if there's enough time, eventually it'll probably happen. And to the layman, millions and millions of years, that might sound more probable. You hear that and you're like, well, yeah, that seems crazy, but given enough time, anything given enough time almost seems like it's got to happen, right? But the truth is, mathematically, no, it's not even close to enough time. It's not even close. Even with eons of time in the mix, it doesn't even begin to approach the likelihood of evolution being a possibility. Darwinism is not even close to being a reasonable explanation. It's sort of like the dirty little secret of naturalistic materialism, the thing they never really want to admit and would never talk about because it embarrasses them. I mean, it takes far more faith to believe this. So we mentioned that there's 1 to the 10 and 77th chance of randomly developing a usable protein through random mutation. Well, there's only been about 10 to the 40th organisms, total organisms that have ever existed, like every bacteria, mosquito, every clover, dandelion, every animal ever, something like 10 to the 40th power, right? If every single time one of those replicates, there's a possibility of a mutation, then there is a 1 in the 10 trillionth chance of finding one of the possible combinations that can even be usable to begin with. That's just to get one that's theoretically usable, right? And even if it would be usable, then it would need to be functionally advantageous. And not by a little, by a lot. And not just functionally advantageous, but functionally advantageous in a particular environment at a particular time for that particular animal in that particular place, depending on how things are at that particular time. Enough to make that mutation cause the organism to thrive over its competitors and thus increase its likelihood of passing it on and evolving the species. Every one of those factors has to align perfectly, but each one adds exponentially lesser likelihood to the already statistical impossibility of the mutation even happening to begin with. Every one of them it's like you're layering on the impossibilities of how silly of an idea this is. There is no chance that Darwinism is true. Evolution is one of the worst possible explanations for biological life that we see today. Not the worst that we see today, for the biological life that we see today, because we see how complex it is. It wouldn't even be a likely explanation if we were trying to explain how a single cell organism evolved into bacteria. Even that would be like, no, still couldn't happen. The math doesn't work. So think of it this way, an animal is replicating, and by some astronomical chance, like we're presupposing there's an animal there. We're presupposing life, presupposing an animal is there, right? And by some astronomical chance that there's a mutation that causes, maybe the individual hairs are thicker or something like that. And remember, the chances are 1 in 10 to the 77th that random mutation would happen to an advantageous protein. Well, okay, maybe conceivably a thicker hair on an animal could be useful, right? But that expression of a thicker hair would have to happen to an animal that would actually benefit from the thicker hair. It would have to happen in an environment that is colder, right? Where thicker hair might help it stay warmer or survive. Thicker hair would not be a huge advantage in a hot or tropical environment, or in, the African savanna. How's that going to help an animal survive? They're going to overheat faster. They're not going to be able to run after prey as long because of their overheating. It has to happen to a very particular set of where it would even begin to be useful anyway. And it would have to be advantageous to a degree that it gave a significant likelihood of an increased livelihood. So not just like, oh, this guy's got thick hair. No, it's like, this guy's got thick hair and he's going to live better than the rest of us and procreate more than the rest of us and therefore have thicker-haired offspring, and they'll eventually wipe out our animal species and they'll become a new species and it'll be advanced, more advanced than us. And that, it's silly. It gets sillier and sillier. And the fact is the vast majority of mutations are actually harmful. And they would decrease the likelihood of procreation, if not kill the organism entirely. Plus, each of those mutations would have to come at the right time in the organism's development. It would have to come at a time when it would actually make a difference, right? If it comes too late, then it can't make any difference. The animal's already there, it's fully formed. If it comes too early, then it would actually destroy the organism because there's too many downstream changes that depend on those early cell divisions. So that mutation that is incredibly rare, astronomically rare, basically impossible, has to happen at a very specific time in the development. And then it would have to happen to a very specific kind of animal at a very specific place, at a very specific environment. In fact, as we have seen, when they do like artificial evolution in a lab, dropping genes can actually provide a temporary benefit. So there's certain, like the flagellum that is within the cell, if that drops out of E. coli, they can develop faster, but they're not better, they're not advancing. They can develop faster, replicate faster, but they're not adding information. They're taking information away, which is actually the opposite of what evolution is saying, because that's how they gain information. So some of these mutations will take away information. And that doesn't advance the species. It subtracts it. So even advantageous mutations wouldn't necessarily advance the life form. Each step in that process is exceedingly rare, and everything would have to line up perfectly. And it would have to happen again and again and again and again and again and again and again, just endlessly. For billions and trillions of these mutations, it would have to happen. We know when they claim life first occurred, right? They have a timeline of where life appears on Earth. And we know the rate that random genetic mutations occur. So you can literally just do the math. And even using their own presuppositions, their own theory, and some enormous number of mutations had to take place, right? We're talking billions and trillions. And the math simply does not work. There's not enough time. And that's why Sir Fred Hoyle, if you've ever heard of him, eventually, he was a famous guy. He was knighted in England, obviously. But he was in front of a big crowd, and he got up there and he said, I've done the math. Life could not have originated on Earth. Because we know that it came on Earth 4 to 5 billion years ago, and I've done the math, and here it is. Literally, they have it on paper. I've done the math. It does not work. There's not enough time. It is impossible. This is not a Christian guy that says that. He's just somebody that was willing to do the math and admit it. And he even said, it's quite obvious when you do the math. It is impossible. Remember now, Darwinism doesn't seek to explain the origin of life, right? It can't. It presupposes the existence of life, and it seeks to explain the diversification, the tree of life idea, how all organisms came from a single cell organism, all life. It can't even begin to touch on things like consciousness and, they can talk about a brain, but they can't talk about a mind. Think about your thoughts. They can't explain thoughts. They can't explain anything that relates to our soul, emotion, like things like that. That's just chemicals in a brain happening. But what is a thought? Like we can think internally and speak in our own brain, and they cannot even begin to touch on that sort of thing. Anyway, it doesn't talk about the origin of life. So the odds are astronomical of it even happening once, let alone the billions, if not trillions of times it would need to happen to produce the life in the world that we see today. And this is why God said in Romans 1, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made." If you look at what has been made, it testifies to God's creative ability, his divine nature and eternal power, so that they are without excuse. Every one of these scientists are without excuse. Every one of them. Every man is without excuse. For even though they knew God, they didn't honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish hearts was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. And that's why I say, like, when we look at this, it is not even close. It's just absurdly stupid of an idea. And nobody wants to say that because we want to, like, be nice, and we don't want to, we're the ones always defending ourselves like creation isn't a dumb idea, and we're trying to make it, intellectually viable. We should be on the offensive. They have the proposition that doesn't make a lick of sense. They lack scientific credibility to their propositions, not us, them. They are truly futile in their speculations. You have to have a foolishly darkened heart to believe what they believe. And again, professing to be wise, they became fools. You have to be a fool to believe what they say. What's interesting is that David Berlinski and David Gelantner they're not Christian. And so they, like I said, they don't hold to intelligent design as a scientific theory. Meyer does. But they cite issues like, in fact, in the interview, I think he asked Gelantner, like, why, okay, you see that Darwinism is a joke. And they don't have any other explanation. This is it. That's all they got. Why are you not convinced by intelligent design? And he cites things like disease and extinction, even man's depravity and suffering. Those are like his reasons to deny intelligent design. And we believe far more than intelligent design, so I'm not saying we should hold to intelligence. Of course it's intelligently designed, because we say very specifically God created, right? But that's why. He cites those reasons. So in other words, they, or at least Gelantner, sees the effects of the fall on creation, and he thinks, well, that's why it must not have been created by a God, because of the effects of the fall. He doesn't consider those the effects of the fall. He just sees them. He observes them. But what is that but a lack of theology? That's a lack of understanding. Our theology explains all of that. Our theology explains decay and entropy and suffering and depravity. Literally, that's what should be expected from the very beginning in Genesis 1 through 3. Like, it was created, we should see evidence of creation, and we do. And you're going to see it going to pieces because of man's sin. And that is exactly what we see. The Bible explains decay and entropy. Our worldview interprets all of that evidence. And that evidence is there for him to see, but he doesn't have the worldview to see it. Like, everybody sees the same evidence, but your worldview is going to determine how you take that evidence. And what did Paul say in Romans 8:22? For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. That's decay and entropy right there. The world is coming apart. It's going to pieces. But we still see the design in it. So we know that the world is not perfect, and we know why the world is not perfect. This is not heaven now. We don't expect heaven now. This is not the new creation. We're not living in the new heavens and the new earth. We're not going to have entropy and decay and suffering and depravity in the new heavens and the new earth. So even the objection of these men that, they're against Darwinism, but this objection that they have against biblical creationism actually ends up adding additional proof to our own position in their objection, which I always think is neat. I just need to understand the explanation rightly. It's also very interesting. David Gelantner said this, though. It's actually surprisingly observant. He says, Darwinism is no longer just a scientific theory, but the basis of a worldview and an emergency religion for the many troubled souls who need one. That's surprising from an unbeliever. That's a stunning truth for an unbeliever, someone that's willing to admit that, see that and admit it. And of course, that's what we've said for years, right? That, yeah, it's well stated, but that's basically exactly what we have observed and stated over and over for years. It's self-evidently true. They're falling back on it as an intellectual crutch to make their worldview seem intelligible. It's not, but it's the best they've got, right? And to see somebody that denies biblical creation, to say that out loud, that's pretty rare. And then what I found fascinating is they kind of grouped together Darwin, Sigmund Freud, and Karl Marx. Those are all pretty famous names. They kind of form an unholy trinity to provide the basis for a comprehensive naturalistic worldview. And they are, honestly, probably three of the most destructive men in the modern age with their ideas and their teachings. Awful guys. Sigmund Freud is the psychiatrist basically addicted to cocaine, and if you read his work or his ideas and then you remember that he's basically always high on cocaine when he's saying these things, then it makes a whole lot more sense because it's nuts. Anyways, Darwin tries to explain where we came from, right? Darwin wants to say, this is how we got here, this is what we are, this is where we came from. What is that? That's ontology. Darwin gives naturalistic materialism a sort of ontology, or he attempts to. Marx tries to explain the path to a utopia in the future. This is how we get there. We're going to work our way to utopia, and this is how we do it. The proletariat has to rise up against the bourgeoisie, whatever, set up the workers' paradise. What is that? That's teleology. That's purpose, right? He's giving man a teleology working towards this utopia. And what is Freud? What does Freud do? And if you look at his work, what's he trying to do? He tries to explain away our guilt. And what is that? That's morality and ethics, right? Remember what we said when we talked about Proverbs 7 and 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is insight. Remember, what did we say? Why can't you make a beginning of wisdom without fearing the Lord? Because you have no ontology, no morality, and no teleology. That's why you can't make sense of this life. You don't know that you're a creature. You don't know what you are. You don't know how you got there. That's ontology. You don't have a basis for morality or ethics. You don't have a lawgiver, right? If you deny God as creator, then you don't have ontology. If you deny God as lawgiver, you don't have a morality or a basis for ethics. And then you fall into what kind of worldview? Nihilism, purposelessness, no teleology because they deny God as sovereign. So he's not doing something with creation and taking it somewhere to do something with it. You have no purpose. That's all of it right there. These men are wildly intelligent and zero wisdom. They can't even make a beginning of it. That's exactly what we pointed out in Proverbs, the exact things. And those three men are grouped together to try to create an artificial religion. It's satanic. It's a satanic worldview. They're trying to replace everything that the Bible teaches, the basis for all of these things. Marx he wasn't necessarily a nihilist, right? And he wasn't formally an existentialist either, because when you're a nihilist, you have purposelessness, but they can't live like that because they're not designed to live purposeless existence, so they create their own purpose. They create their own meaning. That's existentialism. Now, Marx didn't do that exactly. He wouldn't be in the camp of an existentialist, but he had the same agreement with the existentialists that human action is self-determining. You self-create meaning and purpose. That's the whole heart of what we're talking about when we talk about existentialism. So they create meaning and purpose because they can't live those nihilistic lives, and that's why they create idols. That's why Calvin said our hearts are a factory of idols. That's why they live for money, sex, and power, and all the things that we talked about in Proverbs, right? These men are attempting to answer the same questions as the Bible. And that's why challenging Darwinism undermines one of the fundamental planks of the naturalistic worldview, and that's why they get so angry. We are attacking their religion. They don't know it's a religion. They don't think of it as a religion. It is 100% a religion. So that other interview, it's called, and the second interview that I'm talking about here, it's better. It's called By Design, Behe, Lennox, and Meyer on the Evidence for a Creator. And that one's better because they cover a lot of the same stuff, but it's from three more competent guys. All three of them are very, very competent and very good. And one thing I also noticed, I'll close with this. We're coming up on the hour. But There is a very distinct difference in watching these men be interviewed, these people that have an answer, a distinct difference between them and an atheist being interviewed. Or even the like the secular Jewish guys, Berlinski and, I already forgot his name, Gelentner. I don't know why it's so hard, it's a weird name. There's a distinct difference when you see the believers interviewed. They have answers. They have no problem with the challenge. They don't get angry at the opposing ideas. They just explain them away. They're kinder. You can just see it on their face. They're not angry. They're not worried about their worldview being destroyed. They're not trying to protect, the emperor with no clothes, like the atheists do with Darwin and their theories. They get angry because if they lose that worldview, everything comes apart in them, and they would be forced, face to face with the Creator, seeing that His eternal power and divine attributes that have been clearly seen, and they don't want to see that. They suppress that truth and unrighteousness on purpose, so they don't have to see that and face that. And if you watch the difference in these interviews, it became obvious to me that the truth is so obviously on the side of the biblical worldview. And it comes out because these men have a peace about them, a peace and a kindness, and I don't want to say it's a joy, but a distinct difference in their whole demeanor. Their faces look different. And you can watch the atheists be interviewed, and they hate God. They know He doesn't exist, and they hate Him. And you watch them just try to attack Him and dismantle that worldview. Anyway, that's not necessarily an argument for our position, but it's an observation that I think we can understand. All right, so in the future, I think I want to get into a little bit of probably the fine-tuning of the universe, the Goldilocks idea of the universe, for at least life on Earth and that sort of thing. And then the church versus science thing, I've mentioned that a few times. I want to do that as well. I don't know if it's a whole lesson's worth, but it's a misunderstanding. There's no real order to any of this. I'm just finding stuff and being like, oh, that one's good. I want that out there and put it in the series, stuff like that. But there's so much. There's endless amounts of stuff. I think I should probably even at some point recommend some resources where, I'm overwhelmed with the amount of creation material that comes across my emails and subscriptions or whatever. It's endless. So, you could do this exclusively and never hit the bottom of it. So, anyway, discombobulated a little bit. But any questions before we close? Questions or comments? Yep.
I remember Darwin was actually not a scientist, but a philosopher.
Yeah, it's largely philosophical. It is, yeah, and his idea too was not even unique to him. I think his uncle proposed basically the same thing. He supposedly is a good writer and thinks well considering what he had in front of him. But I think it did destroy his religious beliefs, if I remember right. And yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, it's what they've done with his theory more than like the guy in particular. It's not him per se. It's the fact that they've held on to this idiotic idea from a couple hundred years ago when we have so much information that makes it look so silly. It'd be like, it's very much, in my opinion, like someone claiming the earth is flat still. Like, we've been to outer space and we've seen it, That's a silly idea. In fact, we knew better a long, long time ago. But they refuse to give it up. And that's what Darwinism is, because they can't, and even in theory, they can't come up with something better. There is nothing better. But, yeah.
I was just thinking, in my own personal experience with talking to people about creation and stuff, once you start explaining through the lens of Scripture, creation and the change of things over time, and then when, like you said, they inevitably get upset, and they say, well, you're not a physicist, you're not a biologist, so you don't really understand these things. And I thought that was funny, but that's true, that's right. I'm not any of us.
Neither are they.
That's right. But then, if you go look on a top
Right.
starts arguing with these people, and they're like, well, you're not a biologist, or you're not a scientist, or you're not this, or you're not that.
Yeah.
That's what they always seem to go to.
Yeah.
I just find it interesting that they go to the personal attack instead of trying to stand behind what they claim to be.
They only do it to their own advantage too. I mean, they don't tell Dawkins to shut up about climate change because he's not a climatologist. They're going to add it to the supposed 97% consensus, blah, blah, blah. And Bill Nye has basically the same degree as I do, a mechanical engineering degree. That's his level of STEM. Now, has he spent more time in it and studied it more? Obviously. But degree-wise, he's nothing special at all. And they don't tell him to shut up because he's just a mechanical engineer or something. Yeah, they only do it when they accept anything that props up their worldview and deny anything that doesn't. I mean,
I've been reliably told that I'm not a biologist.
yeah, you don't know what a woman is because you're not a biologist. That's right. Yeah.
On the idea of irreducible complexity, what would you say to, like, one of the examples that is brought up a lot in the eye?
Yeah, human eye, yeah. Yeah.
The response might be something to the effect of, well, without some of these parts, it really functions as an eye, but it has some other evolutionary advantage. We just don't know about that.
Yeah.
Or because of the nature of the eye, it doesn't survive in the fossil record, so we're not able to study it as well. What do you think of that sort of response?
I mean, they can say that in theory, but they can't, like, say it in the specifics. What is the advantageous thing about an aqueous humor without a retina behind it that it holds in place, and a lens to focus the light, and an iris to dial in the amount of light? Where is it? Like, say what it actually is then, you know? You can propose that. Anybody can propose anything. Just be like, well, it does work, so therefore it's true. It's like, okay, but like specifically, how? And they got nothing for that kind of thing, right? And that's generally what they do. They kind of have an evolutionary god of the gaps. Evolution of the gaps. Like, we don't know, but it must be so, because otherwise it wouldn't be so, and we can't accept that. Like, that's their actual reasoning. It's circular. And they accuse us all the time of the god of the gaps thing. And they accuse us all the time of, like, well, you don't know, you're not an expert in this field. It's like, well, neither are you, so you're just taking it on faith from what you've heard from people that you trust. I believe that is called faith. You take it on faith. Who do you trust? And if you think that they're all neutral, then you're just insane. Yeah.
I was thinking about that, Will, when you brought that up. It's the same argument they use for intersectionality.
Yeah.
It's just trying to stifle debate if you can't, quote unquote, either empathize with somebody or you don't have the credentials. So they're really just trying to negate the debate for Christians, is what it comes down to.
Yeah. AKA communism. That's how communism works. It's true. That's one of the things that I noticed in these kind of interviews. Like, you can't get the atheists to sit down and try and answer these kind of questions. They hate them. They hate being questioned. They hate having to defend their truth, right? Whereas all the creationists are like, ask us. We have the answers. We are more than willing to discuss this and explain how it does not work and how it has to work. And that, yeah, they get so mad when you pin them down like that. They're very political that way. Politicians are that way. It's true, right? All right, let's close. Heavenly Father, we are thankful once again that your creation declares your glory. We're thankful for the men that are intelligent enough to do the work to show how incredible your creation is and how it points to you, how it so clearly has to have been made by you, and that your eternal attributes and divine power are so clearly seen in everything that you have made. We're not smart enough, per se, to see these things. We don't even have access to the technology to see most of these things, Lord, but we know that you have stated it, and when we come across this information, Lord, we glorify you and we honor you, because understanding this is an act of grace, that you've opened our eyes and our deaf ears to this. And this is a spiritual reality that has happened to us, that we're so thankful that we get to understand this. And it's the very reason that we can understand the work of Jesus, and that we can thank you for his life and his death and his resurrection. It's only because of your work that we believe that truth as well. So we glorify you and thank you for that, and we pray that you will continue to encourage us and deepen our faith through the study of your creation. We pray it all in Christ's name. Amen.
Closing hymn is 79 for the tribute.
Though troubles assail us and dangers upright, though friends should all fail us and foes all unite, yet one thing secures us, whatever betide. The promise assures us the Lord will provide. The